Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Jolie.
We have a really common question, but somebody asked it in a particular way, and I think we should answer it. The question that we were asked is, we're constantly fighting or struggling because we seem to want to handle things differently. And when I drilled into what they meant by things, this particular couple is talking about how they handle the information that they're seeking, that they want to share or want to keep private.
That's a big question.
Right.
A lot of information flowing around in a relationship.
And they didn't even know exactly how to frame this question. So I have seen this over and over and over again. So it felt very obvious to me that the question that they really had was about transparency versus privacy.
Okay.
How do I feel safe in my relationship? Right? We've talked before about how your nervous system's asking that one question, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And I think their underlying question was somewhere around, how do we handle the difference in how we each seek safety? One of us wants more transparency. One of us wants more privacy. What do we do?
Well, I guess first we need to start off by deciding what is transparency and what is privacy.
Well, I think, typically I like to define terms, but I think in this case, we have to also leave a lot of space for the reality that there is no outside arbiter. There is no objective. This is perfect transparency and this is perfect privacy. But I do think we could do a little teasing apart of privacy versus secrecy.
Okay. Yes. So what you got?
Well, for me, privacy is around details that I want to keep to myself. And secrecy is when I want to keep a detail to myself that will impact your safety, your life, your decisions. Right? So I want to keep this private, but right up until the point where now it's going to impact your life. And that's why this is tricky, because how do I know? I may think that, say, keeping a detail private, like where I'm going with a particular partner, that might feel like it's perfectly reasonable for me to keep that information private. And you may feel like that is a level of secret keeping that doesn't let you stay safe because you don't want to show up in the same place and wind up seeing me with other partners. Now, we don't really have an issue around that, but I have met plenty of people who really don't enjoy being like just confronted with, here I am, I'm out. I think I'm just out for coffee and now I'm watching my partner with someone else and we haven't prepared for this.
So now we're back to what you said before about safety.
Right, because in that moment, let's say this is super, super gentle and casual. Let's imagine that I am going out with a partner and we go to a coffee shop. You and I have a particular coffee shop that we go to a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of choices in our city, but it is a really good one. We love it. So we go there a lot. I also go there on a lot of dates. You absolutely have walked in while I'm on a date there. Now, you don't mind that feeling, that sensation of being surprised by seeing me with someone else. I've noticed
doesn't ping my safety response.
Yeah, in fact, you seem to actually enjoy seeing me sort of out in the world, in the wild. That doesn't feel good for everyone. And so what is the line? Where is the line? We don't know where our safety lines are, where we feel like, oh, this is okay for me, until we hit it, until we cross it. So with some things, like let's say getting STI disclosure from new partners, just making sure that you're actually seeing test results, that you're actually generating a conversation about sexual health. We could come to some sort of objective standard of, this is what I'm expecting to see. I'm expecting to see a test performed within the last 3 months or 6 months, whatever you've decided feels safe for you. And I'm expecting you to visualize, actually see, like on their phone screen, their actual test results, and whatever I've decided. We could have a conversation about what would help me feel safer. But in so many situations, I won't necessarily know exactly what feels good for me, what feels really safe for me. And this makes like finding a sense of this is good stuff and I feel good about being private here a little tricky. It can take some finesse. And I just want to move away from the idea that there's some objective setting that will be correct and that everybody will feel okay about.
Right. Yeah. So as I hear you describing that those scenarios and the responses, the possible responses, so these are strategies. Secrecy is a strategy. Pretty much everything we do walking around is at some level related to a safety seeking strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess from a nervous system perspective, you could say that even choosing to not seek safety, right?
Right.
Choosing to live in the unknown is a strategy. I,
Yep.
I have chosen to embrace the unknown and the unknowable in order to not be blindsided, right? To be
Yeah.
constantly reminding myself, like, you don't know. And you have found that frustrating when I'm like, but I don't know where you'll be or what you're
Yep.
doing. And you're like, no, you really do. And I feel safer
But yeah.
imagining
hmm
that anything is possible. And not everybody is wired that way. We're
Which is
all different.
why
Um,
there is no standard for what the right level of transparency versus privacy is in
right.
any relationship.
So secrecy, another piece we could just add to this, secrecy is not the same as privacy, though we may get into arguments about the definition, about whether something was a secret or whether it was private. And that may be based on um, the knowledge that I have, the wisdom that I gain after a disclosure. I may realize, oh, there was secret keeping, and I might not have realized I was secret keeping. So the bottom line is I want to at least have been introspective about, could my decision hurt my partner? Could my decision impact my partner's decisions that they make? Could like and if so, how can I disclose enough so that they can make decisions with full consent? Like, because they can't be in consent if they're not informed.
And in order to know what information they need to make their decisions, there has to be a conversation. There has to be some collaboration on how we handle information exchange.
Right. And let's remember too that we're just all so different. So
Yeah.
what feels normal
hmm
for any one person it's just so unique. I see the
That's
transparency versus privacy spectrum coming up in friendships, colleague relationships. I see this across the board. This isn't just about romance. What we want to have made transparent versus what we want to be able to keep private causes a lot of breakdowns in communication and
and
can lead to a lot of really cool conversations about like
i-
what matters to you.
if people are open to it, for sure. Because I see these kinds of conversations um, in business settings all the time. You have a team full of people all doing different things, and the way they share information has a really big impact on how the team operates.
Right.
And if we could bring those conversations to the surface, the team will work better if we understand each other better. And so a relationship is one other group of people who benefits from that. And I was thinking about secrecy and how I have, like you said, there'll be some um, I'll be talking about something and something will come up. There'll be some, I forget what word you used, revelation, I'll say this is true. And you're like, whoa, that was a secret because for you, it had impact on you and I realized that the secret keeping is an avoidance strategy for me. Like I have avoidance strategies and secrecy is one of them that I'm just trying to avoid. us like dealing with how that information is going to impact you, or
So,
whoever.
so in other words, when you think about the way that you connect to others, one of the ways that you seek safety is to avoid sharing unnecessary details, details that
Yep.
might cause conflict.
Hmm. Exactly.
And at the other end of the spectrum, there is an amount of transparency that also feels oversharing, over detailed. There are plenty of people who are like, yeah, I don't want details. I don't want details about your other partners. I don't want details about your sex life. I don't want details about lots of things, like any number of things. And not wanting details has been extraordinarily difficult for me. I tend to want a lot of transparency and a lot of details from people. And when I have partners who don't want that, I feel unseen. I feel like they don't want to know me. So there's no, this is again, where like there is no perfect recipe of this is the correct amount. This is about um, really finding a morally neutral perspective on the topic of transparency versus privacy. Um, I find that most people don't feel like in our bones, it doesn't feel morally neutral. It doesn't
Right.
feel ethically neutral. It feels like there is a right way, but often that's in hindsight. Often there's a particular detail that we either wanted shared or didn't want shared. And in hindsight, we're like, oh, that was a violation. That was wrong. And yet we're alive, we're vibrant, we're doing stuff. So I tend to look for patterns rather than events when I'm looking at, is this an actual issue? um if if you don't share a particular detail with me and I'm like, oh, that feels like you were hiding, that feels like you were keeping something secret from me, or if you ask to have a certain area of your life be private, well, great. Is that the pattern? Is that your whole life? Are
Is
you trying
that,
to be
yeah.
opaque to me? That's a different thing because we're at core, I think we're talking about building trust.
Yeah. So, well, if we're talking about safety, eventually we're going to get talking about trust.
Yeah.
So we have, so I have a particular set of desires, certainly, about, and maybe needs about how much information gets exchanged, which varies by domain and varies by other person. Um, and so those things can be like the times when I'm like, okay, I'm starting to get uncomfortable. One of the things that can make me more comfortable is a sense of trust, like
Right.
underlying trust in the relationship, that I have with the person I'm having the conversation with. So, what do we have for some strategies for trust building?
Well, what I was thinking about, so going back to the question that was posed by, this was a couple of members of Year of Opening. They were looking for a way to fix this transparency versus privacy issue, and so, but I asked them to go back a level, like, and let's deal with how are you currently building trust, because there was a wound, there was a bit of an injury that started them off down the path of non monogamy. And that wound was that one of them really wanted to open for a long time. And this is how they've framed the wound. One of them had wanted to open for a long time and didn't feel like they were allowed to share that detail. And and then once they finally did, there was lots of fallout and all that. So there was repair to be made on both sides. There wasn't a wrong person in this situation, but we went back to the basics of how do we build trust with each other. And something that seemed to be really important that they had been missing was a sense of consistency, building trust through having regular relationship check ins, like scheduling times to talk about things, to do resentment prevention by naming stuff that's coming up that's bothering them, by working through the emotions that have built up and doing it much more regularly than they imagined they needed to. So that building consistency couldn't just be about disclosure, but actually making specific time that was sacred for them to talk about relational stuff, the heavier stuff. Yes, absolutely sharing wins, sharing gratitudes, but to make some specific space for that, because without that, the consistency was turning out to be the consistency of arguing over a point. Like they were very consistent that one of them or the other would bring up where they were disappointed, where they were challenged, where they weren't enjoying this relationship. But it was happening just like ping, 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 ping throughout a week. So they needed to build consistency of, are we having a time to plan out what our schedule is going to look like? Now that non-monogamy is part of our life, there's actually a little bit more complexity. This is not a surprise to people who've been non-monogamous for a long time, but it can come as a surprise to people toward the beginning that, oh, we need a different level of schedule disclosure. We need different levels of feelings disclosure, and we need to not just build that into our, hey, something's a problem. It's
Yeah, right.
important to
Yep.
be able to name things when they come up, when they're a problem, but also to make some space for that, the sharing of like, what is coming up for you? And if transparency versus privacy is an issue, that would be a good thing to have on your check-in list. How are you feeling about the amount of information that you have or the amount of information that you're being asked to share?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I like it a lot because when I feel, well, I can carry this around until it becomes a problem. And I mean, that's one way, but the culture I'm in anyway, so is so big on pathologizing and on fixing problems versus maintaining systems or preventing problems even. But I like the maintenance approach because it comes in with this morally neutral. Hey, how are things going? Versus looking for a problem.
And I really appreciate the idea that this allows each of us to take responsibility. So if we have a regular time that's on the calendar that we're meeting to talk about this, and towards the beginning, I would recommend at least weekly, but I needed daily check-ins, absolutely daily check-ins. For like 6 years, I needed daily check-ins with my nesting partners, with anybody who I was living with, and co-parenting with. I needed a lot. And without that consistency, things would build up to a point that was untenable. That might be a bottom line requirement for you. It might be daily, it might be weekly, maybe it's 3 times a week. And these don't have to be super long meetings, but they do need to be regular in order to make there be space to have these tougher conversations. And that's the next thing that I would draw attention to in the building trust is, do you actually have explicit agreements? If you haven't built an agreement making process, it is quite possible that your transparency versus privacy, like bickering, that constant argument is coming up because you haven't actually sat down and said, this is the information I expect to have disclosed to me. And this is the information I expect to be able to maintain privacy about. And so instead of having that challenging conversation where, yeah, you might have to accept that your partner isn't at the same place and doesn't want the exact same thing as you might have to negotiate and settle for a little bit less than you want in this area, but you'd know whether it's still within your acceptable range. And if it's not, then you might actually have an incompatibility that makes this relationship not tenable for you. That's
That is a
okay.
reality, yeah, that we need to look directly at. If you start negotiating these agreements and you realize that that you can't make an agreement that will work for both of you, boy, it's good to know that right away rather than leaving everything in the nebulous. Well, we'll deal with that moment by moment.
Right. And I get that a lot. I
Well,
just want to be in the moment. I want to be in the flow. I just want to be in and I find it incredibly frustrating because what I'm hearing behind that, as somebody who works with relationship groups and couples, I hear, I want to be able to defend any given instance
Mhm.
based on exactly the details of that, but I don't want to make any commitments to how I'm going to show up. I don't want to take radical responsibility for who I am in my relationships. And that worries me. That worries me not just for your partners, that worries me for you. Are you willing to take responsibility for how you are as a relator, as a person who is relating to others? You know, you might not be good at relating yet. I mean,
I
I
mean,
would
I
not have said that I was good at at relating in my 20s or early 30s at all. I was struggling like hell. I had terrible habits that I think they were Instagram worthy for having a big label of toxic on them.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
didn't
I
know what
had
I was doing.
lots of them for sure, and the talking, the for some reason, I'm it's brought to mind the way that I would talk in a way that allowed me a backdoor out of any sentence that I said. So you're
Yeah.
talking about responsibility, and
I remember this.
oh my god, it was intense. Once I started to really see it and notice it, I had to stop before I made any statement because I could feel myself trying to work in a way out of committing to what I was about to say, which, by the way, you can't create an agreement that way.
And we have a whole episode on that. We have an episode, we'll link it, called it's about weasel words.
Weasel words.
About
Mhm.
using there are particular ways, and I would encourage anyone who really wants to not have to disclose, who wants to not commit to things, to listen to that episode with an open mind. This doesn't make you a bad person, but you might have learned these strategies that are actually creating an immense block for your intimacy. You may actually not be feeling fully seen and safe yourself because you're constantly leaving yourself that back door. And it takes time. That took years to work through with you. I had a hard time being patient on that, but I appreciated you were doing a lot of like men's work and men's circles at that time. And I remember being really appreciative of the fact that there was some language built into that
That
process around
it
like,
was great
oh,
to have.
you're not holding yourself accountable.
Mhm.
And the only person who can hold you accountable is you.
Yeah.
Um, so we've
And
got,
then
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I think I was gonna do the same thing you were, which is so, um taking responsibility and accountability, and the word accountability immediately leads to repair in my mind. Like, okay, so I'm going to take responsibility and be accountable for the way this just went and my part in it, and I didn't give you all the information that I know you needed, that we have a written agreement about. That happened. Now, what are we going to do? Now, ideally, the agreement will have at least a starting point for what
Yeah.
happens next. Because
Yeah.
the agreement just says we will do this and this and this and this, and that's over.
I don't
There,
find that to be super productive.
it's. I'm not even sure that's an agreement. It's a promise, I guess. But the
Well,
agreement says these things are going to happen, and if they don't, here's what's going to happen, because it takes into account the fact that we are not perfect.
yeah, we're human still.
Still human.
I so that is you and I talk about agreements in this way all the time, that the an agreement session isn't complete until we know what's the reaction plan
Yeah.
if and when an agreement is either violated or, let's say, um flexibly reimagined.
Flexibly and
It's creatively executed,
extemporaneously
right?
reimagined.
And that happens a lot. Once we're in a situation, we realize that the thing we agreed to doesn't seem to quite map onto the situation we find ourselves in. And so now we have to actually be extemporaneous. And in doing so, we might do what our partner considers a violation. At which point, yeah, I want a response plan. I want to know what happens. Do we take a short break? Do we schedule a session with our therapist? Do we have an imago dialogue? Do we make time to actually take some time? And you and I often will sleep apart for a night or two to just like ground back into like, what do I actually need? What do I actually want? Rather than getting reactive to each other. That's what works for us. I don't care what your reaction plan is so much as that you have one that at least covers what's your very next step if there is some sort of misalignment, misunderstanding, or violation. Um, and repair is a big deal. If you don't currently have repair skills that you can count on, that's a great piece of the puzzle to add in. But I want to circle back to this transparency versus privacy. I just want to make sure as we wrap up,
Yep.
we're really on point here.
Yeah.
Transparency versus privacy, imagine it as a spectrum. There is, if that spectrum just, if it's a, what is it? It's a line. It just goes off in both directions forever. There's no person who wants perfect transparency and no person who wants perfect privacy because again, human, those things don't exist. But wherever the two people who are having a conflict, wherever you are on the spectrum, and we've talked about this with enmeshment versus hyperindividualism, extroversion versus introversion. Anytime we pick a way of viewing things through a duality and we posit this spectrum, now I am more toward one end of a spectrum and you are more toward the other. So when I think
Mhm.
about privacy versus transparency, on the count of three, which one of us is which? I'm transparent. Like right,
I am private.
right.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to notice where we are. I would not say I am the most transparent seeking person I know. I definitely would not say that you are the most private person I
Yeah.
have ever met,
I've
or
known.
even the most private amongst people that I'm currently interacting with and dating. Um, but it feels like we're very far apart. So I like to use the visual of this broad spectrum, this big line, this wide line that goes off in both directions a long way, and remember that we're actually probably relatively close together in a lot of ways. And even in transparency versus privacy, we may be much closer together than we imagine. And we are not oppositional, as in adversarial. We are not experiencing this as you are perfectly private and I am perfectly transparent. We are trying to negotiate around how we'll inhabit those qualities and what our bottom line needs are from each other. What would work? What would be good enough? And that helps me remember that, my desire for transparency won't always align with your desire for privacy. And so when I think back to this question that was asked, what we found was there was a there was a level of panic in one partner around they really wanted to be able to keep things private. And when we worked through this question for a while, like over a year, they started noticing that the privacy that they wanted also had to do with timing. They wanted to be able to disclose details in their own time. They wanted to be able to disclose details that were private about their emotional life, their soul, their spirit, their deep inner world over the course of several weeks. They didn't want to have to disclose that like, "Oh, an inner awakening. Boom, I have to go home and report that to my partner." They wanted time to let that deepen and let it be private for them. Um, on the other hand, they were able to understand that their partner wanted disclosure about their sexual contacts when before the next time they were going to have sexual play together. And so when we started sorting out the reasons why and the different domains where they might want privacy versus transparency, that's where the creative solutions were found. It was about not viewing each other as like, oh, you're so different from me, because there was actually quite a lot of there was a lot of wiggle room for each of them to accept the other person's perspective. And that said, it can be really painful to want a level of transparency from a partner who just does not have it. They don't it's not something they're interested in sharing. So this hits really personal for me. I was married to someone who was incredibly opaque about their inner world. I to this day I really have no idea whether they were withholding information or emotional reactions from me or whether they didn't have access to them at all. I have no idea. But they weren't able to be emotionally, spiritually, intellectually transparent with me. And while that was really painful for me, that was about me deciding whether that relationship was okay. So I made those requests. I wish I had made them earlier. I wish I had understood to ask for those things early on and find out that this person didn't have that
Right. If you know,
available because they
if you,
might not.
so I'm hearing you bring up the idea of self reflection in both of you. Like you
Right.
don't know what level of self reflection they had to then share with you those reflections, because there's those two steps, and then for you, um, and I feel this. I'm me. I'm sure everybody else is pretty much the same. You know, I extrapolate out to the world at large. And you mentioned this earlier, my particular balance of privacy versus transparency. So I just act the way I would want people to act toward me. And the golden rule. But people are not what all people are different people. They're not they're not me. And the introduction of domains of communication, like you were talking about, like you may want to hear everything about my sexual experience um, with someone else and nothing about my emotional experience with them. Like those are two different domains of information that you may or may not want to have. But
And getting some
um,
granularity in there can help you perhaps negotiate. And don't forget, there are other people involved. And so just
that's
because
right. Now
your
you
partner
have,
might be down to
yep,
disclose and they might have a request from someone else to
to
not
not.
disclose.
That's
And
right.
now we have to get into it is into the weeds. Sometimes we're in a situation that feels like we are incompatible. It might be time to reimagine the relationship. And reimagining doesn't necessarily mean ending. It could mean reconfiguring. The word de-escalation often gets used, but I think of it mostly as reimagining. What will
Yeah.
this relationship be for? It
Altering your
leads me,
agreements.
yep, and reimagining the purpose of this relationship.
Hmm.
The purpose of your relationship is an incredibly powerful thing to ground into. And if you are caught in this, like this can turn into a battle of transparency versus privacy. The last thing I would leave people with is if if you can set down the morality.
Yeah. Yep.
To have the deeper conversations, try to set down, to set aside the idea that your position is the morally correct one, because in this case in particular, it tends to leave people locked in patterns. And I've seen it for decades. Decades, people will stay locked in a baseline devaluation or moral high, the idea that they have the moral high ground because they are more transparent or more
Yeah.
private, and and it's more
And
correct the way they do it.
yeah,
And that puts us back into what David Cooley had said on an earlier episode of this of Playing with Fire. That puts us in the adversarial mindset, and now we're not actually relating. We are adversaries, so we are now in a non-relational conversation that's not going to lead us to the place that we actually want to get. Um, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but that's where I would ask everyone to stop and stand and spend some time getting clear. This particular conversation lends itself well to linking into relationship agreements, weasel words, repair, accountability. We have other episodes on those. I'll make sure that we link several of the most relevant episodes in the show notes here. And I hope anybody who's listening who would like to talk about this particular topic more, join us for one of our upcoming Ask Me Anythings. We have Playing with Fire Ask Me Anythings happening on a monthly basis. If you go to joliehamilton.com/AMA, you'll find the sign up for the next one.
love to hear from you.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com. And find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.